Now you actually did the Ghetto Red Hot Supercat remix.
Yep, me and Bobby Collins.
And Supercat is my favorite dancehall artist of all time.
Yep,
like there's something about Supercat and between the voice and the cadence and the realness behind what he's saying that I just wasn't able to connect with anyone else. And Shabba Ranks is probably my number 2 behind Supercat. But what I always found interesting about the Ghetto Red Hot remix was that you went straight hip hop beats. Like it didn't have the timing of a reggae beat. It had a straight hip hop beat, but it actually worked. Were people really doing hip hop remixes of reggae artists back then?
That was something I was really doing. Bobby was getting some of the mixes to do, but for me, I was, digging with everybody else who was digging in New York during the early 90s. So it was just like, okay, cool. If you listen to Ghetto Red Hot, it has, the Lou Donaldson, but, Oh Biddies in the BK Lounge came up. Okay, I can't use that right now. So cool, I put it on Ghetto Red Hot. Diamond still used it for Punk's Jump Up, but that was kind of in the same time or just after when I had already done it for Ghetto Red Hot. Or, the drums. I just took things that everybody was using and I put them in my reggae remix pile because I was like, I'm going to still get a check off of these beats, whether or not we did it. Biz did Toilet Stool Rap, cool, I flipped that right into Mac Daddy. So for me, it was an opportunity to use the raw Jamaica official, not like, the Jamaican vocal, not big up on Jamaicans, but not the Jamaican vocal or the second or third generation dude, taking the raw what worked for Kingston and actually flipping it right into it. And that was my lane, you know what I'm saying? Taking it, making it ready for New York hip-hop DJs, not even New York, hip-hop DJs, period, in America, and making it ready for radio in America, period. That was my lane. That was what I was assigned to do. You know what I'm saying? To constantly just keep flipping that into it. So Ghetto Red Hot, Mac Daddy, a bunch of that stuff, that was all there. Then later on, Mega Banton, Soundboy Killing, and all that led up to Here Comes the Hotstepper and Boombastic. That's what came on the back end of it. But that scene and that set for a DJ was already established by what I was working on.
Now I Need Kamoze's Here Comes the Hotstepper was a massive international smash. It was actually picked up by the Predator Porter movie?
Yep, it was put on the Predator Porter soundtrack. But it started, I'd given the original version of the song to a compilation Columbia was doing called Stir It Up, because once again, I was doing all the remixes and stuff for them. And I put that on there, and then when it was time, I was looking at a remix for a single, I decided that I was gonna take all the classics, because, thinking like a DJ, instead of going from the hip-hop section into the reggae section with the Ghetto Red Hots and such, I was like, all right, cool, we're going to play the classics and we're going to play the reggae. Let's use these records to connect the reggae to the classic sections. So that was really intentional, where I put Supercat's South Central record on Outstanding, Mega Banton was on Barry White's Playing Your Game, just everything that we would have played in probably the red zone or the muse at that time for the R&B classic section. I had Shabo on Rising to the Top that never came out, but it was just a bunch of records. Shabo on Don't Look Any Further, that was his Let's Get It On remix. Like I intentionally made a set playlist of that flavor.
So when you did it, Hotstepper, did you have any idea how big it was going to be?
Nah, I think that I was still crystallizing what I was working on for just like who I was around, the DJs I was around, the energy of where I was. Like when we did the original song, it kind of had more of a Cypress Hill feel. So Aini was, in the projects in Brooklyn and, staying with some people, but he was watching the box. So, the I Know What Bo Don't Know, that was him watching DOS Effects. Everything that was happening in 90, 91, 92, he was just taking it, na 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 na. On Cypress became na 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 na. Like all of that stuff was direct hip hop, stuff. And I'm the lyrical gangster, murderer. He was kind of working a rap angle to what he was doing, and he had a record actually right before that called Hotstepper. I'm stepping in hotter this year. So he just said, "Here comes the Hotstepper." Like he was just working on that angle. So the original version was way hip hop, and then the remix actually put the right type of beat underneath it with the lyrics that was able to make it go.
So you suddenly have an international smash on your hands that you produced.
Yep.
Was that your first huge record?
I think so. I think that was my first huge single, number one on the pop chart. Yeah, that was my first production that was number one on the pop charts, international, everywhere, doing everything.
So you now have And how old were you at the time?
I was like 21.
21 years old, and you have the #1 pop song pretty much in the world. Because I remember when that dropped, it was just everywhere. And I think when the movie like took it over, it took it to like a whole different place.
They just kept going with it. I mean, the beauty of it for me is, and this is what I kind of feel like, just even my New York upbringing, when I get it right for here, like that was really right for Brooklyn. You know what I'm saying? Heartbeat was Brooklyn. Heartbeat was New York City. The Murderer was New York City. It was everything that was here. When I put that together, that was a Hot 97 record. My dad was also working promotion on it at the time. So Angie Martinez, I played it for Steve Smith. That was made from, I played it for Flex and Angie first, and they was like, yo, this sounds kind of all right. When I just had the remix on my 4-track, I'm like, what you think? This can go? They was like, that could work. And that record actually started going there, but it was Hot 97 in the box in Houston that played it initially. And it was really that DJ level music for me. And then the song was strong enough so it went everywhere. So it was another lesson for me in making stronger songs. I can make beats all day, but if the strongest song is ultimately going to be the best thing that's going to happen.
Right, and I mean, this was a Jamaican reggae artist that was relatively unknown to the U.S. market.
Right.
And you suddenly gave this guy a #1 international hit, and his biggest hit to date. I mean, this is by far the biggest thing that he's done. What really changed in your life once you had that? Because I know once you start hitting #1s, things start to move a little differently for you.
My perspective kind of was cool, but there's a couple things. One is that, the deal that we initially had when I did his demos and built up, the time was up on it. So he decided, he wanted to switch the deal a bit. And I was kind of like, you know what, I did this one. You can go ahead and do that. So he went on and did an album with Elektra that didn't really have much fruit on it. But once again, it lost the chemistry of what we were able to really do. And then also it was funny because then people started going, hey, just get a hit. Just throw one of those 80s records underneath it and kind of make it work. This is prior to any of like the Diddy run of all the 80s, hits off of those type of records. And also it was around the time he was working on My Life. But I think even My Life didn't necessarily have a single that went the same way as that. It meant culturally more, but it didn't have the same type of impact, as far as crossover appeal. But I just feel like, for me, it was a thing where I did that. I'm always like at the been there, done that state of mind. So it's kind of like, all right, that's cool. Hey, Salaam, put one of those records under a Snow record. I'm not gonna do that. I don't feel it. So I just went back into my cave and then started coming up with something else that I felt like I was inspired by. And I've always been the person to kind of pull back and do what I've liked more than just doing what everybody else might think is the hit of the moment or the style of the moment. And it was cool. We had a hit, publishing deal was coming through to this deal, a couple checks, but once again I came up and I was blessed to have guidance from my OG who was able to say, all right, this is how we're gonna move. We're gonna do this, this, and this. Buy this studio, move this over here, your apartment's over there, but I was still already living in the middle of Manhattan in his space and in his studios and everything else. So I was already getting it as far as I was concerned.
You start working with the Fugees.
Yeah, so the Fugees kind of overlapped when I created Here Comes the Hotstepper in 90, 91, 92. He went back to Jamaica. It starts to blow up in 95. In the interim, I met the Fugees at the end of 93. Nappy Heads came out and was doing what it needed to do as far as their artist development singles, I will call them.
I just had Praz, I interviewed him a few months ago, and we were talking about the first Fugees album. So you guys come out with Blended on Reality.
Right.
And I remember the Nappy Heads remix was kind of in rotation. Like there was a video on MTV. I thought it was a dope song, and like the hip hop heads were fucking with it, but it didn't really get like large scale commercial success.
Right.
So, I mean, when you guys finished that album, the first album, how did you guys feel about the project?
I mean, we were proud of it, but at the same time, we also realized that we had just missed the boat. Because that style of hip hop was phasing out.
the album comes out and it essentially flops initially. What was really the thinking with you and the Fugees during that time after, putting together what I thought was a pretty good project?
Well, I didn't actually work on any of the album, and I think the album might have been out already. I know Booth Boff was out, but that was their first single, and it wasn't received. I remember being with Flex, and he was like, Booth Boff, Badoof Boff. Like, who makes a single called Badoof Boff? He wasn't with it at all. What are you doing this week? Fugees. Oh, Taisha's gonna come over here with that Badoof Boff. Nah, we ain't doing that. So when I made the Nappy Heads remix, I think it started to give life. The album might have even been out already, or it was on its way out. So I didn't look at myself as attached to whatever the album was doing. And it wasn't even a day in 1993 or whatever. It was still, people were still trying to find their single. I don't even think it was a first week sales. I don't think the Score's first week sales were crazy, even though it went on to sell a world worth of singles. I think it was just like, there's some potential here. Should we get rid of them? No, actually, this record is going on this station, that station, and there was a certain place where East Coast hip hop played. There were, certain, it didn't necessarily penetrate the West Coast the same way, but you would get a record and it would go Hartford, Boston, Virginia. Like, you can kind of get the Northeast going with a New York hip hop record during that period, and maybe get a couple of stations in the South if it was a certain type of song. But just for New York hip hop the way it was, which is what Nappy Heads was. There wasn't anything about it that was really crossover. You get more London, Paris, New York, East Coast love for me. And for me, I thought it was all a positive step. And then the Vocab remix, it was kind of getting them into pocket again and setting them up really for what was to happen. I think those steps now, it's kind of like when you have 2 SoundCloud records and you got a buzz, but now you just really need your joint to really go all the way. And that artist development is missing.
Okay, so you guys dropped the first album. Well, you do the remix, and then you're kind of involved with the Fugees at this point. Right. And then you guys start working on the second album.
Because I was creatively locked in with the Fugees and we were doing good, Fuji La was actually recorded before they even got their second budget. I was doing songs for Spike Lee's Clockers movie. So on the Clockers soundtrack, I did maybe 2 or 3 songs, and then I was submitting songs. So I had a song that we did called Project Heads that never came out that I recorded and said, hey, let's do this for Clockers. I'm working on it, Spike Lee movie, let's figure it out. So we recorded this song, and then during that session, Lauren and Wyclef had been at my house, and I played them a beat that I made for Fat Joe. And that beat was essentially what became the Fuji La beat. And Lauren's like, no, that stuff's cool. Play that Fat Joe beat. And then that day during the session, I played the Fat Joe beat, and Wyclef jumps up from his seat and says, we used to be number 10, and spits his verse. So he obviously had written the verse. Wyclef is one of those people that has 3 verses whenever you approach him. Just know that. He's going to have like a 3-shooter of verses that are going to sound like it's brand new, that he's had written at any given moment that can approach, and he can say it 10 different ways. But he jumped up and said the Fuji La verse. We recorded Fuji La during that week, and I sat down and put it together, and then during that interim, they got their budget for it, but then technically I did Project Heads, which would have been used for the score, and Fuji La already, and I was a more expensive ticket item. So their manager, David Sonnenberg, approached me and was like, hey, I'd like you to produce the album with them, but you can't be more than a 25% writer, because they still had to keep room for the group. And obviously you're able to pick the right things and bring the best out of the group. And I looked at it like, there's a lot going on with y'all right now. I probably would be better off doing show. I know there was Mobb Deep had just had an album where Q-Tip mixed it for them. So I was like, let me hear what y'all got. So Wyclef came by, he played me, I think Forte had given him part of the Cowboys beat. He played me part of How Many Mics beat. He played me the Ready or Not beat. And I was like, you know what? You already got something going on here. KRS-One was working with them at the time a little bit too. There were a couple little records. I think the Free Mumia beat, Wyclef had a song too, a couple other things. So I was like, yo, you know what? Why don't y'all just get ahead and record the record, and then when you need me, come back to me. So then that way I'm not spending 8 months just focused on this album with this group. I already did a couple songs, and then whatever you need from me, We family, you know what I'm saying? And that's the way I looked at it. I took a more of a mentor position than saying I want to sit here and produce all your records because I got it. And then, let me just come in when needed. I don't need the babysitting job.
So after the initial album doesn't even go silver, barely sells.
Right.
The score comes out and goes diamond. I mean, how many copies did it sell? Was it like 12 or 13 million worldwide? Like some insane amount.
That's a nice audit coming. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But it's probably over 20 something right now,
20-something million. And
Like,
you
like
had
worldwide, like
the
something
lead
crazy.
single off of that.
It's actually, the beauty of it is that it's on the album 3 times, maybe 4. So they did it was my original version, the Sly and Robbie mix, dance hall, the Sly and Robbie mix was dance hall mix. Wyclef and Lauren did a mix, and then there was another North Side mix that I threw Mary J. Blige underneath. So it was on there at least 3 times. So I was still, I'm pretty nice off of that.
Right, and I think you had mentioned in another interview that you made like low 7 digits off that.
Yeah, definitely. Over the years.
So you made a few $1 million off that album.
Yeah, definitely. It did well for me. Did very well.
Was that the first time that you saw millions of dollars off a music project?
Yeah, between that and 90 Kamoze, because it was such a huge single, like between the two of them happened at the same time, I just done my first publishing deal, so I had I Need Kamoze and the Fugees within my first couple years. So I was ghetto red hot at that moment for whatever it was worth. It was going in a great direction, and that allowed me to, the studio that I went and did Nappy Heads in, I went back and bought it. You know what I'm saying? I had a studio on 54th in between Broadway and 8th. Nice SSL room, chilling, like, okay, cool, we here now.
The Fugees have the Monster album,
Right,
and then they break up.
right.
Lauryn Hill drops a Monster album, Miseducation. Now, you didn't work on that, did you?
The last thing I did for her would have been the Sweetest Thing remix, which was kind of right before that. So she was starting to work on Miseducation, but then we had some other vibes kind of going in, never really finished the songs. But, when she was pregnant with Zion, we recorded the Sweetest Thing remix.